Welcome to the Self Revolution podcast. This is your weekly reminder to wake up to who the fuck you really are. I'm your host, Breanna Rae Blaney, and it is truly my honor to guide you on this journey of self-revolution and evolution. Join me as one by one, we collectively wake up to create a more harmonious, enlightened, and fulfilled world. Welcome back to the Self-Revolution podcast. Today, I am joined by the one and only Blaine Lourd here in his office. Blaine Lourd is the founder and CEO of LordMurray, a wealth management firm that manages over $7.5 billion for celebrities, athletes, entrepreneurs, and human beings like you and me. And it really was just such a privilege to have this conversation with him today, where we dive into the evolution of the financial industry, the importance of maintaining your authenticity and your truth, and unpacking mindset around money and investing, and really kind of going against some of the norms of what is so often really thought of when you think about a financial advisor or Wall Street, and get to the heart of what it really can be like to work with someone who cares about you and cares about your hopes and your dreams. So I hope you enjoy this episode of Self-Revolution. Well, Blaine, welcome to the Self-Revolution podcast. I am so grateful to be here with you. I think we met probably about 7 years ago now. You were one of my first clients, official clients, when I was a relationship manager in the financial industry. And I remember coming to meet with you by myself for the first time and walking into the door and feeling pretty intimidated, a bit nervous and scared. And since then, I have just had the pleasure of getting to know the man that you really are, and your heart and your soul. And I'm so excited to share more of that with the world today. So thank you for being here.
Well, you're so welcome. I'm happy you're here, and happy we have this connection.
Mm-hmm. Same, Blaine, same. So you have had quite the journey, Blaine. Starting from growing up in Louisiana, then going to work on Wall Street with some of the biggest firms, and then starting this amazing firm, LourdMurray. And so I'm just curious, tell us a little bit about your journey and some of the main inflection points or aha moments that you've had that have made you the man that you are today.
Oh, man, it's a great question. Looking back on a life, at 60 years old, so many inflection points, and obviously it's easy to retrospectively distort how it all came down. Like you mentioned, I grew up in a small town. I went to a big high school. I always wanted to be in the oil business. It's really all I knew. My dad was in the oil business, and I went to LSU, and I thought I was going to study petroleum engineering, and did that for a minute. And in '82, the oil and gas business kind of collapsed in the southern states, especially the very energy specific states like Texas and Louisiana. And my dad, came up to see me. I think we'd gone on a bird hunt, which is what we do down there. And we stopped at a little bar on the way home, and he's like, son, I don't think the oil business is a good path for you. And I was absolutely crushed, because I always thought, I would be with him, with men like him, rolling through the country roads, in an all-in-one coverall with my name on it. And he said, nah, it's not going to work. You're going to have to find something else to do. And I was like, Dad, what? He's like, well, I think you'd really be good on Wall Street. And I said, wait, I'm not moving to New York. He's like, no, Blaine, Wall Street's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. And I was like, well, okay. Probably had to look up the word ubiquitous at that time. But then, like a month or so later, he took me to Houston, Texas, and we met this guy named Jeb, who was his friend. And he worked at a Merrill Lynch office in the Galleria. And we walked in. Everyone knew my dad. It was a time of starched Wrangler blue jeans and cowboy boots, and he introduced me to Jeb, ruddy faced, large man. And he said, "You're gonna sit with Jeb for a little while, and I'm gonna sit out here and read the paper." And I sat in this guy's office, and like, "Blaine, I'm gonna teach you about Wall Street." And he started answering the phone, and of course, the bull market of '82 had started, and this was '83 or into '82, and prices were rising rapidly. And he'd pick up the phone and he'd say, "Yes, I'll buy you 1,000 shares of Coke," or "Yes, I'd buy you 1,000 shares of GE." And he'd hang up the phone, and on every phone call, he'd say, "I just made $600. I just made $400. And I remember thinking, why do you make less money for selling than buying? And then eventually I figured it out. But the next day, my dad and I were driving somewhere, and he's like, "What do you think of Jeb?" I'm like, "Dad, Jeb, no offense, but he is not the smartest guy in the shed." My dad said, "Exactly." And I thought, okay. And then, after that, I tried to get a job as a stockbroker for a long time. Didn't work, ended up working at, a little financial group in Texas that did insurance and benefits planning. And then I visited my brother in LA, and I moved out here, and I finally got a job at E.F. Hutton. And that's kind of how it started. Over time, it just kind of morphed into this thing where I went from one firm to another, kind of looking for a panacea where I felt like the values that I wanted to bring to the table for the people I represented, were aligned in the firm. And I just never really felt that way. And I had a great manager at Oppenheimer, who since passed away, and he'd walk around the office on Fridays. And by this time, I was probably 29 or so, and I had a corner office. I had a Bloomberg. I wore pinstripe suits. I was rolling, Wall Street style. And he'd walk around and he'd knock on my door and he'd say, great month, great week, great day. And, you never really ever talk about the clients. And, I was planning on trying to figure out another way to do this. And my wife at the time, I told her, the mother of my children, I'm like, "Man, I can't do this anymore. Like, this is just not, something about this doesn't feel good." And she's like, "What are you talking about? You can't not do this. These people who give you their money, they trust you." And she's like, "You have to find another way to do it." And so you make decisions, and the right people, come in your life. And I met this kid who wanted to intern for me, and he went to Texas A&M, and he turned out to be an absolute Mensa genius. And he built a business plan for us, and in 2006, we left. And we started, Lourd Capital then. And I hated the business brief for such a long time, and ever since I made that decision to get on the right side with the clients and be a fiduciary and get out of the conflicts of interest business, and I've loved it ever since. Yeah. And it's just been so rewarding for me to meet people like you, and to work with people like you, and to get to work with this wonderful staff I have and these great clients I have.
That's amazing. When you made some of those decisions, like when you moved out to LA, you started working in Wall Street, you're from Louisiana. How was that shift for you in terms of your own identity? Like you were talking about, you thought you were going to be out there working in the oil business, and then you came out here and started working and wearing pinstripe suits. What did that feel like?
I think more than anything, Bree, fear motivated me, right? Like I didn't have a backup plan. I mean, I rolled out here in a Honda Civic with no radio, and I was living on in my brother's 1-bedroom apartment in a futon in the kitchen. So, they said, "Hey, it's a numbers game. We're going to give you this reverse directory, and you're going to make calls." And in terms of identity, to get to your point, my identity had always been, I grew up in the South. I did all the things Southerners do, played a lot of sports, went to LSU, was in a fraternity, grew up away from my parents. And then, I'm out here after a short stint in Houston and, did I know who I was? No. Mm-hmm. Did I know what Wall Street was? No. But I knew that, simple math is if I call 300 people every day, I'm going to get 30 to talk to me, and I'm going to get 10 to say I can call them back, and I'm going to get 2 or 3 to ultimately, and I don't want to use the term invest, buy something from me, because that's basically what it was. And yeah, so I kind of think I found my identity as I grew, like everyone does. But, what drove me in those early years was just sadly fear. Yeah.
Well, Blaine, I mean, I think it's big to admit that. And also it's really relatable because often that is what drives us, right?
Yep.
It's fear. And when we're driven by fear because we're scared of what the opposite could be, or pressure from our parents, or like, hey, I have to make money. I mean, money is a really real thing, right? In our society, we have to survive. And so I just commend you for sharing that. And I think it resonates. So Blaine, by the time you were 29, and you said this out here, you were rolling. You had your boss coming around, congratulating you around the job you were doing, right? And you were making good money, living a pretty lavish lifestyle. But as you've said, you weren't necessarily the happiest man. So talk to us a little bit about, how did it feel? Like, you were making a lot of money. You were, I think from the outside, probably looked like the definition of success. Corner office, great job, family, wife, all that stuff. And how were you actually feeling on the inside?
Ultimately, I just did not feel like we were aligned with the client. And I ultimately just did not feel like the people above me really cared. And, and I had someone, tell me that at Lehman Brothers once, a manager I worked for, he's like, Blaine, you got this all confused. He's like, your job is to turn your client's balance sheet into your own. And this is a game of chance. And I was like, I don't want to be playing games of chance. This sounds like chicken on the highway. Yeah. And the more I kind of evolved as a human being, as a man, the more I realized that this just didn't suit me. I came from a different place. My grandfather on my mother's side was a true stoic of a man that led his life with so much honor and integrity. And I spent a lot of time with him. And, he is someone that I always wanted to emulate. And, being in the corner office, looking at the Bloomberg, wearing my Armani suit with shoulder pads in it, that was kind of a bad color purple. It just didn't feel right. And identity, like, okay, what am I going to be? Am I going to be one of these Wall Street guys who just plays the game of chance, and sometimes the clients get lucky, and, every 3 years I get a bigger and nicer car? Or am I going to really try to be impactful on the people that trust me and that I serve? And I when I resigned from E.F. Hutton and I told the manager at the time what I was going to do, he's like, no one's going to pay you for that. And I was like, I think people will pay for the truth. Ooh. And I think this is my truth. And I think eventually, if they won't pay me for it, I'm going to find something else to do. And ironically, like 4 years later, that guy called me and said, hey, will you come back? And I was like, you don't get it. Like, no, I'm not coming back. This pond has been fished out.
I love that, Blaine, because it just shows kind of the values in terms of you maybe not even being able to articulate it at that time, but just being able to recognize that there was this disconnect between how you had been raised and what you felt and what you were doing, and how there was a misalignment there. And then you were brave enough to take the other path and to choose that.
What's funny? You and I have talked about this, Bri, people, you can rationalize anything in your mind. but your body doesn't lie. You know, your body just doesn't lie. And, you know, I could rationalize, well, you know, I'm doing well and I'm getting ahead, and, you know, the clients are doing pretty good. And, you know, I'm protecting the clients from the firm as much as I can, but I really don't feel like, you know, for me, that should be a part of my job. I don't want to protect the clients from the firm. I don't want to have to watch the back of the people who write my checks. I don't want to have to go into every meeting cynical about what someone's saying to me, and then be, you know, have this massive carrot on the end. If you sell this, we'll give you this. And the body doesn't lie. And my body always felt, you know, strange. You know, I went through mad vacillations in weight. We're going to get to this. I drank too much, you know, and I was stressed. And, you know, I was bringing that stress home to the people who love me and to the world. And, you know, kind of a Beauty and the Beast, you know, like how's Blaine going to emotionally react to this or whatever? And it just, I don't know, that evolution as, you know, a human being, if you will, takes what it takes for everyone. But I think, you know, mine was kind of baptized by fire because I'm at the tip of the sphere, right? The Wall Street machine that runs the global chaotic commercial system. And, you know, the people's need for, you know, security, status, whatever it is, however they, you know, figure out what they need in their head. And so, yeah.
The war within, Blaine.
The war within.
So how did that feel? Like when you were in that moment and you were trying to cope with that. And like you said, you started drinking too much, stressed, you felt it in your body, which completely agree. The body doesn't lie. And often we're fighting ourselves. We're in this constant war and struggle. How did you move through that time? And how did you start to find other ways to reconcile that and start to move through the war within?
It's a great question. You know, I moved through that time like I guess everyone does, right? I got to a place where, you know, I couldn't live with it. I couldn't live without it, at least in terms of drinking. Yeah. And, you know, I stopped drinking on August 1st, 1996. And I think that was a very, you know, pivotal moment as I started to get a little more spiritual, if you will, about, hey, you know, Blaine, how are you doing? But more importantly, how are the people around you doing? And, you know, and I had never really thought about that because, you know, you grow up and, you know, you watch your father kind of succeed and then descent horribly in the oil crash and other places. And, you know, you kind of have this attitude of, you know, early bird gets the worm, devil takes the hindmost. I got to outthink, outmaneuver, out everyone to make a meager living in this cruel world. Yep. And for me to get to a place where I could change that thinking and, you know, kind of move through the world and nope, that's not how it is. That doesn't feel right for my body. You know, I have to love and serve. And the people who find me, that I find, we will align or we won't. And I don't need to worry about it. And I just have to kind of live, you know, my truth as best I can. And I mean, at the end of the day, you know, what is life? Life is about the love we get and the love we give. And, you know, it manifests in my work as giving people security, you know, figuring out their why, you know, and getting them to their why.
I loved what you said, Blaine, in terms of your own journey of this culture that I think that we're often in, where we feel like we have to fight. Like we have to constantly just be in the grit. And like, if I don't compete with this person next to me, and if I don't push harder and work more, then I'm not going to win. And there's really this very divisive attitude that a lot of the world is feeling right now.
That's where the, going back to the body feels. That's what causes this body anxiety.
How do we rectify that, Blaine?
Bree, Jerry Garcia is one of my favorite rock and roll poets, of course, and he said something one time that I just thought was so profound and so simple. I don't want to hurt anyone, and I don't want to get hurt. And how do we rectify it? I mean, it's a good question. It's a journey for everyone to decide. But going back to that fear and faith thing, right? Like, okay, am I going to live in this fear? False events appearing real. Am I going to catastrophize tomorrow and start to hear things that aren't said, believe things that aren't true, see things that aren't there? Or am I going to stay right here in the moment and, do the next right thing in front of me and serve the person that I'm intentional with? And if I can do that, I can stay grounded through all this noise. And, the noise is so ephemeral, right? Like, that's the great thing about Wall Street and why I love it, and why I'm so happy I never have another job, is because, the noise always changes. Like, this year's crisis was not the 2008 crisis. It's always something new. And, one of our mentors always says, if everyone's talking about it, it ain't worth knowing. It's already in the price. So, in this particular moment we're in, they're talking about a lot. And there's a lot of disruption, but none of it matters. Yeah. They only think it does. What will come and shock us will matter, but nothing that they're talking about in the moment. And, from an investment standpoint, right, as well as a personal standpoint is, I have to have routines and a plan that I can live with, no matter what. And I want to say it's simple. Of course, it's not easy. But everything is fine right here.
Yeah. In this moment. And it's a choice. And I think that that's what you so eloquently just illustrated there around the choice of faith or being in fear, and how every moment right here, right now, you have that choice to come back, to be in this present moment, and to have a different perspective on the world, that we don't have to choose to see everything around us as a threat to us, but we can choose to be in faith and believe.
And and I'm not saying that we don't look to the future with optimism at all. Like, I'm going to the Sphere tomorrow for a couple of Dead shows, and I'm really excited about it. And hopefully I'll make it there. Who knows? And, I have a trip with my boys in the summer and a bunch of their friends, and I'm planning for it, and I'm excited about it. But I also know that things change. And the only place that I can handle everything that comes my way is right here. Because if I am projecting, do we project unicorns and rainbows? We normally don't. We project only the bad things. That's right. Kahneman wrote a lot about this. Yeah. Negative pangs feel a lot worse than positive pangs. And when we project, we start optimistic and then we go to something pessimistic. And so, I'm no different. I do it too. So I try to stay out of it.
Yep. Well, and that's the self-revolution, and that's the journey of that constant kind of retraining of how can I stay here in this present moment, shift my mindset, and recognize, have the awareness that we are a bit hardwired that way, and to start to retool your nervous system around that. So one more question, Blaine, until we really dive into more of the financial sphere, which is around, you just talked about going to the Dead show. One of the things I love about you, Blaine, is that you are radically yourself. Ain't nobody hiding from me. And you've got nothing to hide, right? So how have you, Blaine, been gotten the confidence to be so radically yourself, to not care what other people think of you, and to just own it? I mean, it's really hard to do in today's society when there's so much projection and judgment. How have you become and just learned to be yourself?
First of all, thank you for that compliment. I appreciate it very much. We talked about the J.J. Cale song, one of my favorites. They Call Me the Breeze. I ain't hiding from nobody. Nobody's hiding from me. That song, I play it. I played it live. I love that song. It says a lot because, my grandfather, who has been mentioned, used to say all the time, Blaine, it really doesn't matter what others think of you. It only matters what you think of you. And that kind of just stuck with me, and by the way, it's not like there aren't a few pages in my life I want to rewrite. It's not like that I haven't done things I regret, but I've learned through time that when those things happen, I need to straighten it out. If it involves a person, I need to confront it and say, hey, I was wrong. I'm sorry. Can I do anything, for you? Or if I ever can, you let me know. And some of those conversations go well and some of them don't. But, I'm just not very good at not being who I am. I don't want to pretend. I want to live life in my fullest expression. And, if that means, playing guitar and writing and going to Dead shows and going out of the bayou for a month in the summer and having my friends and wearing board shorts and, rolling this bad mustache. That's what I do. And that's how I want to be. And I think the authenticity that, I try to bring to the table, really is powerful for our team. And it's powerful for the clients who meet us. Like I said, I'm not for everyone, that's okay. But I'm for a lot of people. And we find the people that are authentic too.
And I'd argue, Blaine, that's what has made you so successful in terms of a number of aspects of your life, but just that radical authenticity. You attract the people that want to be around you. And there's a direct correlation in my mind from that to business, right? So talk to me about that for just a moment in terms of how does authenticity, or how have you seen authenticity translate into business success, like bringing more clients in the door?
I think so many people quickly genuflect towards a client's point of view or a prospect's point of view, whether it's right or wrong, whether it's, whether you're trying to explain 4-level chess and they only understand checkers, they quickly will try to soften the place where they can be liked. And I think, my, if you will, radical honesty around that is oftentimes, and I'm not saying that there aren't obviously people that do this, because there are many, but it is refreshing for someone to leave a meeting and say, man, that dude, he kind of put me in my place, and I wasn't ready for it. And I don't know if I like him or dislike him, but I know I could probably trust him. And that's it. Like, the truth is always going to be known. And that is the truth. Like you can start off one way and try to get someone to another way, but what Nick Murray used to say, and I've said it a lot, if they trust you, it doesn't matter what you say. And if they don't trust you, it doesn't matter what you say. And the way they don't trust you is if you always say, that's a good idea, or yes, we can do that for you, or yes, I think you should, sell all your U.S. treasuries and buy Canadian bonds is something I heard this week. And I'm like, first of all, you can't, but okay, it's a bad idea. And let me tell you why. And then, you can either get them through the emotions of the moment, because it's mostly emotions what we deal with in this business.
So let's talk about that, Blaine. First, I want to just level set, because a lot of people listening to this podcast are not necessarily deep in the financial sphere, right? So what do you do, Blaine? What does a financial advisor do? help us explain what you do. And not all financial advisors are created equal, which I also think is important to share. So really, what does LordMurray do?
So LordMurray is a full service financial planning, wealth management, and asset allocation firm. And we are fiduciaries.
And what does that mean?
A fiduciary is the tip of the spear as it relates to advising people on their money. We are regulated by the SEC to do exactly what we say. So what do? Well, we sit down with people of all walks of life, entertainers, athletes, entrepreneurs, wealthy families, institutions, and we help them to, disseminate their why around money. Mm-hmm. And to get to that why, we have to go through a long and arduous process of money therapy. Really, what we do is really try to get to, okay, who are you trying to take care of? When are you trying to take care of them? Why are you trying to take care of them? And what's the most efficient way to do all of this in terms of, how you deposit money, how much money you have, how much risk you can take or need to take or emotionally can withstand? Because as we know, no plan works unless you can stick with it. And, I loved David Booth's analogy over years of, it's funny, I think about it all the time when I fly around, and I fly around a lot. Captain says, when you're flying through turbulence, sit down, buckle your seatbelt, and everyone does. Markets get turbulent, everyone gets out of their seat and walks around. And it's usually the wrong thing to do.
So Blaine, this feels pretty different, I think, than what a lot of people think of when they think of the financial industry. I think from the outside, a lot of people see the Wall Street, which we talked about, and the big shiny businesses and big cars and all of that, and a lot of fear and scare, kind of in that scarcity mindset. And what you just talked a lot about was much more around sitting on the same side of the table as someone, having someone be able to walk in your office and really tell them about, hopes and dreams and emotions and mindset around money, which feels very different. So how have you kind of seen this evolution of our industry, Blaine? You are famously quoted and written about in Michael Lewis's article back in I think it was 2007 around this. How have you seen our industry continue to evolve? And how have you, which I think you have been, really been on the forefront of continuing to evolve these conversations around money to really get to the heart of what money really is?
We think about it in life, like what are the things we can control, right? Like you're in the business of mind and health, and I'm in the business of money and health and mind and heart and body, like you are. And what can we control? Yep. Well, we can control a lot. We can control how we figure out who we need to take care of and when. We can control, how we allocate our cash based on our needs of when we need to take care of who and when. We can't control the markets. And this idea that you have to have, a short term or even couple year period of time where, markets pay you to get where you need to go is just not true. And markets always pay. And, when I got into this business, the Dow was at 2,000 and now it's at 42,000. And we think about what's happened since 1987, recessions, Democrats, Republicans, the threat of global thermonuclear war, all sorts of things. But, people, in the world are, they're reaching forward and they're creative and they want to make better lives for themselves and for the world. And how I've evolved is knowing that, look, the markets are going to take care of themselves and we can't control it. But what we really control is, who are you? Goals, values, interests, people, all of those things. I got to know them. We got to know them. And we got to know the North Star you're fighting towards. And if you give me that North Star, I can help you get to that North Star. And sometimes it'll be a roller coaster ride. But if you are on the North Star, you're not worried about it.
When I think about who I want managing my money, right? It's someone like that who is helping me think about the bigger picture in my life. Because if I don't know what the North Star is, then, I'm just over here kind of chasing the success or chasing returns or chasing money. And I'm out here in that more fear-driven mindset where if I have someone like you who's able to help me think about what is my North Star in life, and then how is my wealth and my money actually feeding that North Star, I think that's a very different mindset.
It's all about kind of reframing the emotion because, what is life? It's emotion, And by the way, I'm not immune to it. I don't like it when the market goes down. I can't stop my heart from beating, either. But my business is very simple. I want to stop the reaction. I'm still going to have to talk to you about the urge to react, but that's why you called me.
So Blaine, for the person out there who maybe has never worked with a financial advisor before and maybe is feeling quite a bit of fear around their finances or fear around the financial media because it's so prevalent. I mean, we are literally bombarded, pings on the cell phone, news media, constant around how we should be freaking out. What advice would you give them?
You mean besides read more poetry or turn the TV off and take your dog on a walk? I would remind them that the chairman of CBS News, maybe the founder of CBS News, Edward R. Murrow, which you're too young to remember, Bree, had a famous saying, and it was, if it bleeds, it leads. And remember that ratings for these, the constant drumbeat of financial journalism, especially on the television, are 4 times higher when markets are down than they are up. Because negative pangs hurt a lot worse than positive pangs do. And when the crowd is moving in one particular way, it is easy to hop in the crowd and run off the cliff. And you have to reset yourself to, wait up. What does this really mean for me? If you're out there and you're looking for a financial advisor, one, I would say absolutely have a fiduciary who has real skin in the game with you, who, has divorced himself from the common conflicts of interest that we all know about from, the large institutions. And I would absolutely make sure that you connect with him. And until you can really have that body feeling, because it is, because, you get into pitch meetings with guys and they're throwing out numbers and they're talking big words, and you're supposed to be impressed because maybe you start to feel a little uneducated about it, but you got a referral to someone and they say he's the guy and all of that. And he's throwing you spreadsheets out with big numbers and all of that. Like, yeah, that's fine, but that's not what this is about. This is about connection. Can I trust this guy, this gal? And does he trust me?
Powerful, Blaine. And it is, it's a really important reminder for people out there who don't necessarily understand it all, because it is complex. A lot of the financial industry is complex.
They make it complex.
They make it complex.
They want to obfuscate truths. They want to subtly patronize you to think that somehow the value of the work that they do is too hard for you to reach. And if you're ever feeling like that when you're with someone who wants to do your money or who is doing your money, you're in the wrong room.
It's powerful, and it's really important. I think it's a very important message to hear, that if you feel that way, walk out of the room.
Walk out.
You don't owe anyone anything. And
if you're patronized in one bit, walk out.
So Blaine, in Matthew McConaughey's book, Green Lights, you were quoted. I think our man's on the wall up there, actually. And he talked about how he credits you with helping him make a big decision in his career to actually go after, kind of take a different direction in some of the films he was doing, and also for the extra zeros. But what I loved about reading that, because I'm a huge fan of that book, Green Lights, it was a pretty powerful one, that even someone like Matthew McConaughey has these decisions that they have to make around trade-offs in their life. Even someone like him, with you perceive from the outside all of this money and confidence, is making a decision around his career, and he's coming to you to help him think through that. So Blaine, how do you help people think through trade-offs like this?
First of all, man, I had a little part in Matthew McConaughey's success, not much at all. He is a courageous, really earnest guy. I respect how he lives his truth and how he treats people in his life and his family, and mainly he is a man of tremendous energy. But look, we all get to these chapter ends in our lives, right? And what I'm hoping to help people to get, like our athletes and like our celebrity clients, is I always start off with, when they're young, hey, we don't want you to have to do that commercial when you're 35. So we try to help them get discipline around savings and how they live, and to make the right decisions around risk. And for guys like him, obviously, he calls up and says, I'm going to make a massive pivot in my career. I'm not going to make a paycheck for 3 years. Am I okay? And I said, you're more than okay. You're about to make more money than you ever made. And thanks, Blaine. I'm happy to hear that. And I'm like, it's true. And so, and by the way, it all came true, right? It's mindset, and it's not mine, it's his, because he's that dude.
What is the relationship between mindset and money and emotion? Like, why is money so emotional? Like, I think about me in my own life, and I just made this huge pivot in my own life and took a massive financial risk. Why is money so emotional?
Man, that's such a great question. And for me, at 60 plus years old, looking back, the people who live with a generous heart and an open hand oddly never have to worry about money. As it relates to emotion, right? Like, okay, what am I feeling? Why am I feeling this? Is this real? Or am I going through the seeing things that aren't there, hearing things that aren't said, imagining things that aren't true? Or am I running with the crowd? And why are people emotional about money? I mean, when you ask me that question, you're packing in so much, right? Like,
Totally.
Family origin. What was it like? You know, did you have a violent past? You know, how were you treated around money? Like, was everyone in your life scared about it? Or were they open-handed about it? And, you know, and that is one of the most important parts when you're doing this North Star mind map discovery process. 30% of the questions are about money, about emotions around money. You know, what was the worst financial mistake you ever made? How did you react in the 2008 correction? You know, and when you get that, you know, like, okay, either you had a bad advisor that couldn't talk you off the limb, you had a portfolio that was way too risky or way too concentrated, or you didn't understand what you owned, or you panicked. And the only way I'm going to get you not to panic is get you to this North Star and have you trust me. Because most people panic around lack of trust. I don't trust the system. I don't trust my guy. I don't trust the world. So emotions are tough though.
It is huge, and it can drive a lot of decisions in life. And it's so important to be able to start to unpack that. And it's really inspiring to me. And part of the reason that I'm doing the work that I'm doing is to help people move in this direction and like really shift out of this state of allowing our emotions around money to drive us and to drive our decisions, and actually be able to tune into, you know, who am I really? Where do I want to go in my life? What is my North Star? How do I build a philosophy and a mindset around my money that can be really supportive to me, that allows me to tune out that noise so that I can move forward in my life? And so I just give you a lot of props for doing the work that you're doing.
Yeah, I think too, Bree, you know, no one wants to admit it, but we're really good at fooling ourselves.
Yep.
You know, especially in heightened, noisy environments where every one of our peer set, you know, because let's be honest, most of us hang around with people who think just like us, believe what we believe, you know, and go to the same places and do the same things. So we get in these weird echo chambers, and that fear permeates back on us. And then we start to imagine things that aren't there, and we start to fool ourselves. And, you know, our inconsistencies around decision making in those moments, it very important to use the old Jedi mind trick on yourself and just play dead and wait, you know, and think about it and wait, or walk away from the crowd for a minute and get, pardon the pun, sober. 9 times out of 10, a reaction in a, you know, a very noisy moment like we're experiencing now is a bad reaction.
So Blaine, what does success mean to you? I want to talk about this word success and kind of unpack it, because you have, and I'm sure maybe this definition of success has evolved for you over the years. From the external world, I think often we think of success as tied to monetary success. If I have X amount of money, then I will be successful. How do you see that playing out in your own life? And then how do you see that playing out in your clients' lives? Great
question, Bree. And, you know, for me, like I said, you know, when I was growing up in the South, you know, it's not like we were worldly people. And, you know, and I got this idea that, you know, I just want to be rich. Like, used to say that, you know, what do you want to do in life, Blaine? I just want to be rich. And, you know, that kind of drove me for a while. And then, you know, as I matured and went through a bunch of the vicissitudes of life that we've already talked about, you know, I realized that, you know, I just want to be dedicated to my work. I want to be dedicated to people who count on me. I want to expand my mind. I want to help my teammates. I want to help my boys. I want to help the people in my life. And, if I can do that, and through all of the emotions, good or bad, they can count on me. I think that's success.
So how, if my mindset, Blaine, is not necessarily geared around that, like if I am if I'm sitting in this chair and just feeling like I am kind of on this hamster wheel of chasing that external success, maybe like you when you were younger, how do you help clients reorient around that? Because obviously you're helping them make more money, more zeros, but how do you also help them reorient and expand their mindset around this broader definition of success?
I think one of the most important ways to reorient people around that is figuring out that why and getting very specific about that why for them. Because so many people in the financial world who, have accounts places and have brokers and, have advisors or whatever they have, they think about how'd the market do, how'd I do? And if they did less than the market, they feel less than. If they did more than the market, oh my guy's really smart. And how many times in my career the same guy said, Blaine is the smartest guy I know. And then 3 months later, I don't think Blaine knows what he's doing. And that's the market, right? And what we do. So if you can get them to the specific whys, you can reorient that emotion to one of, forward progress and looking forward instead of, this momentary, minute in time.
What's really exciting you, Blaine? Now that
You mean besides the dead shows?
Yeah, besides the dead
day?
shows. Well, I love that that's what's exciting you, because it really is you are a multi-passionate person. And as you kind of think about this next chapter for yourself, but also for the financial industry, and what's next for you as a human being?
I think this business and the advice business in general is going to grow for the people who get this simple truth of be authentic and make them trust you even if they don't hire you. And that's what so many people have a hard time with. But if I stay in the position of honor and integrity and in a way that I can. And by the way, it's not always that way. Like I said, I have to make amends to people too. Like my son, my 24-year-old always says to me, he calls me every morning. I love that boy. And every morning when he's walking to work, he calls me. He's like, Dad, you're only a human being. And when you have children, you realize you take on this, they don't see you as it, but you take on this kind of hero status for them. Like you are impenetrable. You're bigger than life. You're Superman. And for my 24-year-old to say, Dad, you're only human. It was a real eye opener for me because I was wearing a mask for him, not a dishonest one, but I was still trying to prove something to him. And when you get to a place where you don't really have to prove anything to anyone, you prove everything to everyone. And that's the paradox. And that's the parable.
And that brings us, I guess, back right to where we started around identity and the ultimate kind of just realization that when you let go of that and when you're able to just be radically in touch with yourself and true to yourself, then everything else kind of flows. And it's eye-opening how many masks that we wear. So Blaine, last question.
Yeah.
What's the meaning of life?
I think we covered it, right? The meaning of life is simple. It's the love you give and the love you get. and, the service you provide, the people you count on, and the world. And that's it. But yeah, it's love and service, as simple as that.
And that's, I guess, that's the journey, right? That's the ultimate journey, is just how can we continue to come back to the ultimate North Star and reorient our time and our energy and our work.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, and recognize when we're feeling that tension in our own body, when it's not feeling aligned. I think we know intuitively that it's not aligned with our truth and our knowing and that ultimate goal. And too often we ignore it.
We rationalize it with our heads.
Yeah.
Like, we rationalize it, like, I know this isn't right, but it is, but maybe it is. And that I know it isn't right is always coming from your body.
Well, thank you, Blaine,
Thank you
so much for being here on the podcast today, and just for illuminating, I think, a lot around the other side of the financial industry, what it means to work with someone like you, and the power of truth and authenticity. And I am just so grateful for your role in my life and the pillar of truth that you continue to be. And I'm so excited to continue to see how the journey unfolds, and more fun and dead shows ahead.
Thank you, Bree. You are welcome on the purple carpet anytime you like, as you know.
Thank you, Blaine.
Thank you.